Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, I invite you to join me on a peaceful journey where whispers of magic fill the air and the quiet of a hidden village beckons you into a world of wonder. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the warmth of the story guide you gently into a restful sleep. As you drift, remember to subscribe for more stories that carry you softly into the night. Now, let the tale of Thalia and the mysterious traveler unfold, leading you into dreams as enchanting as the stars above. Once upon a time, in the village nestled between lush green hills and thick woods, there lived a young woman named Thalia. She was neither a noble nor a grand lady, but her heart was as warm as the sun that rose each day over the meadows, and her wisdom, though simple, was cherished by all who knew her. Thalia was a humble herbalist, known for her gentle hands and the way she could coax life from even the most withered plants. Her days were filled with the soft rustle of herbs drying in her cottage and the quiet gratitude of villagers who came to her seeking remedies for their ills. One evening, just as the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson, a stranger arrived in the village. His cloak was tattered, his boots dusty from travel. But there was something about him that caught Thalia's eye, a spark of mystery, as though he had seen realms beyond this one. He stopped at Thalia's cottage, his shadow long in the twilight. "I've been searching for someone who understands the old ways," he said, in a voice as worn as his cloak. From beneath his robes, he drew a small, delicate flask made of crystal, its surface gleaming with an ethereal light. "This belongs to you now." Thalia blinked, taken aback. "But I am no keeper of treasures," she said, hesitant to accept such a gift from a stranger. "Ah, but you are," the traveler said with a knowing smile. "This flask does not belong to those with riches or titles. It belongs to those who have a heart brave enough to seek what has been lost." Before Thalia could ask more, the traveler bowed and vanished into the fading light, leaving only the flask in her hands. It was light as air, cool to the touch, and the crystal shimmered with colors she could not quite name, as though the stars themselves had been caught within its fragile surface. Strange symbols were etched around its neck, curling like vines along its edge. Thalia took the flask inside, her curiosity piqued. What could such an object hold? And why had the traveler given it to her? As the moon rose high in the sky, casting its pale glow through the window of her small cottage, she held the flask up to the light. To her amazement, the crystal began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, until the entire room shimmered in its reflection. Peering closer, Thalia saw something extraordinary. The crystal, once clear, now swirled with images, landscapes of wild forests, glittering lakes, and mountains that stretched to the heavens. As she stared, she realized these were not places she had ever seen. The flask was showing her realms hidden beyond her own, places touched by magic, where the ancient forces of the world still thrived. Thalia's heart raced. She knew of magic only from the old stories the village elders told by the fire. Magic, they said, had once been abundant, flowing through the world like the wind through the trees. But it had been lost long ago, hidden or sealed away by those who feared its power. Yet here, in her hands, was a relic of that time, a key to the magic that had once existed. The next morning, Thalia sought out the village elder, a wise woman named Mirella, who had lived long enough to remember the whispers of magic in the air. When Thalia showed her the flask, Mirella's eyes widened. "This is no ordinary flask," Mirella whispered, tracing the delicate carvings with trembling fingers. "It is said that such a relic holds the power to reveal hidden realms, places where magic still lingers, waiting to be reclaimed." "But why would it be given to me?" Thalia asked, still bewildered. "Because it chooses its bearer," Mirella replied. "And you, my dear, have been chosen to seek out what was lost." Thalia's mind spun with the enormity of the task laid before her. Could she, a simple herbalist, truly be meant for such a quest? And yet, as she gazed into the flask once more, she felt a pull deep within her heart, a longing to see those hidden realms with her own eyes, and to uncover the lost magic that had once made the world so vibrant. Her journey was about to begin. The days that followed were filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. Thalia kept the crystal flask close, though she had no idea what to do with it. Sometimes, under the pale moonlight, she would watch the swirling images inside, but no answers came. The hidden realms seemed just out of reach, and the mysteries of the flask weighed heavy on her mind. One fateful evening, as the sky was draped in twilight hues of deep indigo and silver, Thalia found herself wandering near the edge of the village where the forest loomed dark and ancient. The air was cool and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves above her. She paused, clutching the flask tightly in her hand, when something unusual happened. The flask began to glow, not just faintly as before, but with a brilliant light that shimmered like stars trapped within the crystal. Thalia's heart leapt as the light spilled from the flask, illuminating a path that led deep into the forest. It was as though the flask had awoken, guiding her towards something unseen. Her breath quickened with excitement and a touch of fear. She had never ventured far into the woods, for the villagers spoke of strange things that lurked beyond the well-trodden paths. But the pull of the flask was undeniable. With trembling hands and a determined heart, Thalia stepped onto the glowing path, following the light as it wound deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to part for her, their towering forms casting long shadows. But the light from the flask chased the darkness away, creating an aura of safety around her. After what felt like hours, the forest opened up into a clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, stood a great stone archway, covered in moss and ivy. It looked ancient, as though it had been there for centuries, forgotten by time. The air around the archway shimmered with magic, and as Thalia approached, the light from the flask grew even brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her pulse quickened. She had heard of such things in the old stories, gates to other realms, portals through which only the brave and the chosen could pass. Was this what the flask had led her to? Thalia hesitated only a moment before stepping through the archway. As she did, a soft musical hum filled the air, and the world around her shifted. The cool forest breeze disappeared, replaced by an otherworldly warmth. Colors she had never seen danced before her eyes, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water. The archway behind her faded into the mist, and before her lay a new land, vast, strange, and undeniably magical. She had arrived in the enchanted forest. The forest here was unlike anything Thalia had ever known. The trees towered above her, their leaves shimmering like silver in the soft light. Flowers with petals the color of moonlight dotted the ground, and strange creatures flitted between the trees, beings made of light and shadow, whose eyes glowed with an ancient wisdom. The air was thick with magic, and every step Thalia took sent ripples through the world, as though the forest itself was alive and watching her. As she marveled at the beauty and strangeness of the realm, a voice called out from the trees, low and melodic. "You are not from this place." Thalia spun around to see a figure emerge from the shadows. He was tall, his cloak woven from the leaves of the forest, and his eyes glimmered with a deep green light. His hair was wild, like the branches of the trees, and his face was stern yet kind. He held a staff made of twisted wood, and his presence was commanding, as though he was part of the forest itself. "I am Phelan," the figure said, his voice soft but strong. "Guardian of the enchanted forest. And you," he said, eyeing the glowing flask in Thalia's hand, "are the one the flask has chosen." Thalia clutched the flask tighter, unsure of what to say. I don't know what this means," she admitted. "The flask was given to me, but I don't know why." Phelan's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, studying her. "The world of magic is fading, little by little, and with it, the realms that were once vibrant with life. You hold in your hands the last hope for these lands. The flask can guide you to the places where magic still lingers, but the journey is fraught with danger. There are forces that do not wish for magic to return." Thalia's heart pounded. The enormity of the quest began to sink in. "But I'm just an herbalist," she said, her voice small. "How can I restore magic to the world?" "The flask has chosen you," Phelan said simply. "That means you have the strength within you. But you will not face this journey alone. I will guide you, and together we will seek out the lost magic that has been hidden away. With Phelan by her side and the flask glowing bright in her hand, Thalia knew there was no turning back. The hidden realms awaited her, and her quest for lost magic had only just begun. Thalia and Phelan travelled deeper into the enchanted forest, the crystal flask guiding their every step. The trees seemed to lean toward them, whispering secrets as they passed, while the air grew thick with the scent of ancient magic. Thalia felt the weight of her quest pressing on her heart. Yet with each step, she grew more determined. The lost magic had to be found, for the sake of her world and the realms beyond. The path soon led them to the foot of a great hill, upon which stood a crumbling temple. Its stone walls were covered in vines, twisted and thick with age, and the columns that held the temple upright were cracked and weathered by time. The sight filled Thalia with awe and dread. She knew without Phelan's explanation that this was the lost temple, the place the flask had shown her in its glowing visions. "This is the first of many trials," Phelan said, his voice low as he gazed upon the temple. "Here lies the first fragment of the lost magic. But the temple does not easily give up its secrets. It is guarded by ancient magic, and only those who are worthy can pass." Thalia nodded, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She clutched the flask tightly as they approached the temple's entrance. A great stone door engraved with symbols that pulsed with a faint light. The flask in her hand began to glow in response, and the door creaked open with a sound like 1,000 whispers. Inside, the temple was cool and dim, lit only by the flickering light from the flask. The air was thick with mystery, and the walls were lined with carvings that seemed to tell stories of forgotten times. At the center of the room stood a large pedestal, and upon it a stone tablet inscribed with an intricate puzzle. "The first challenge," Phelan whispered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tablet. "To unlock the magic hidden here, we must solve the puzzle. But beware, for the temple is not without its defenses." As if in answer to his words, the ground trembled, and from the shadows, stone statues began to stir. They were carved in the shape of fearsome warriors, their faces expressionless, but their movements swift and deliberate. They were the temple's guardians, come to life to test Thalia's worth. Her heart pounded as the statues closed in, their stone swords gleaming in the dim light. Phelan raised his staff, ready to defend them, but Thalia stopped him. "Wait," she said, her eyes drawn to the tablet. "This puzzle, I think it's the key." She stepped forward, ignoring the statues, and they loomed closer and focused on the symbols etched into the tablet. They seemed to shift and change as she stared at them, their meaning just beyond her grasp. But then, the flask began to glow brighter, illuminating the symbols in a soft golden light. Thalia, Phelan urged, his voice tense as the statues advanced. We don't have much time. Her fingers trembled as she traced the symbols, and suddenly she understood. The puzzle was a riddle, a test of wisdom, not strength. The symbols represented the elements: earth, air, fire, and water, each tied to a specific order. She whispered the sequence to herself, feeling the answer come together like the pieces of a forgotten song. With a deep breath, Thalia placed her hand on the symbols in the correct order. The temple rumbled again, but this time the statues halted, their stone forms freezing mid-step. A soft click echoed through the room, and the stone tablet slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a glowing rune, pulsing with the very essence of magic. You've done it, Phelan breathed, his eyes wide with awe as he stepped closer to the rune. The first fragment of the lost magic. Thalia stared at the rune, its light casting strange shadows on the temple walls. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and lifted the glowing fragment from its resting place. As she held it in her palm, the flask in her other hand pulsed, absorbing the rune's power. For a moment, Thalia felt the world around her shift, as though the magic itself was welcoming her into its embrace. But the victory was short-lived. As the rune's power flowed into the flask, a low, menacing voice echoed through the temple. You may have passed the first trial, it hissed, but the road ahead is perilous. The magic was hidden for a reason, and those who seek it will pay the price. Thalia's blood ran cold. She glanced at Phelan, whose face was grim but resolute. They had succeeded in this challenge, but it was clear that greater dangers lay ahead. We cannot turn back now, Phelan said, his voice steady. The next fragment lies beyond the Valley of Echoes. We must press on. Thalia nodded, though her heart was heavy with the weight of the warning. She had passed the first trial, but the journey was far from over. The magic of the realms called to her, and she would not stop until it was restored. The forest changed as Thalia and Phelan ventured farther from the temple, its vibrant magic dimming to a muted, shadowed silence. The path led them through deep woods that seemed to hold their breath, watching with unseen eyes. The air grew heavier, colder, and soon they found themselves standing at the edge of a vast expanse. The Valley of Echoes. The valley stretched before them like a forgotten dream, shrouded in a mist that swirled and danced in the wind. Tall, jagged rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and between them faint whispers filled the air, rising and falling like a distant, haunting melody. There was a sadness here, a deep sense of loss, as though the very land mourned something long forgotten. Phelan's expression darkened as he looked over the valley. This is the Valley of Echoes, he said quietly. A place where voices of the past linger, trapped in time. The lost magic left its mark here, But the echoes are not kind. They speak of what was, but also of what could have been. And sometimes they twist those memories into shadows that can mislead even the bravest soul. Thalia felt a shiver run down her spine. "How do we find the fragment of magic here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper in the stillness. "The flask will guide us," Phelan replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "But be careful. The echoes can confuse the mind, and many who enter this valley never leave." With the flask glowing softly in her hand, Thalia took a deep breath and stepped into the valley. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, almost like walking on air, and the mist curled around her like ghostly fingers. Phelan followed close behind, his eyes sharp and watchful. The whispers grew louder as they moved deeper into the valley, and soon Thalia could make out fragments of words, pieces of conversations that seemed to swirl around her. The magic was too powerful. We should have sealed it away sooner. They'll never understand the price. The voices were old, ancient even, and Thalia could feel the weight of centuries in each word. As they walked, she began to hear other echoes, softer, more personal. Her own voice, speaking from some distant memory she could barely recall. "You'll never be more than a simple herbalist, Thalia. Why dream of things beyond your reach?" The words stung like nettles, piercing her heart with doubt. She paused, glancing at Phelan, but his gaze was fixed on the swirling mist, as if he too was hearing whispers meant only for him. The valley seemed to tighten around them, the mist growing thicker and the echoes louder. Thalia's mind felt clouded, weighed down by memories that weren't quite her own. Her feet slowed as the whispers tugged at her, each one unraveling her sense of self. But the flask in her hand pulsed with warmth, a steady glowing light that cut through the fog of doubt. Its magic called to her, guiding her through the maze of echoes. Thalia closed her eyes, focusing on the light, and with each step, the path became clearer. "There!" Phelan said suddenly, pointing toward a distant rock formation. It was larger than the others, its jagged edges rising sharply against the mist. At its base, the air shimmered faintly with magic. "The fragment is hidden there," Thalia nodded, quickening her pace. But as they approached the rock, a figure emerged from the mist. A shadowy form, its features blurred, but unmistakably human. The figure moved with a strange grace, gliding over the ground like smoke. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and when it spoke, its voice was soft and chilling. "You seek what should remain lost," it said, its words echoing in the valley. "The magic was sealed for a reason. You cannot hope to restore it without great cost." Thalia hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am a guardian of these echoes," the figure replied. "A shadow of what once was. I was one who helped seal away the magic you now seek. turn back or face the consequences of your actions. Phelan stepped forward, his staff raised. "We cannot turn back," he said firmly. "The magic must be restored, or all realms will fade into darkness." The shadowy figure seemed to sigh, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Then you are fools," it whispered, before vanishing into the mist. Thalia felt a chill sweep over her, but she pressed on, reaching the rock formation. With trembling hands, she placed the flask against the stone. The light from the flask grew brighter, illuminating the rock and revealing a hidden crevice. Inside, nestled in the heart of the stone, was another glowing rune, pulsing with ancient magic. She reached for it, and as her fingers closed around the fragment, the valley trembled. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the echoes themselves were protesting her actions. But the flask absorbed the magic, and the valley fell silent once more. Phelan exhaled, his face grim. "2 fragments now," he said. But the warning grows clearer. The closer we come to restoring the magic, the greater the danger. Thalia nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She could sense it too, the weight of what they were doing, the peril that lay ahead. But the flask still glowed with a quiet strength, and she knew there was no turning back. Their journey would continue, as Thalia and Phelan left the eerie silence of the Valley of Echoes behind. The air seemed to lighten, but the weight in Thalia's heart only grew heavier. They had collected 2 fragments of the lost magic, yet the warnings that echoed through the valley still clung to her thoughts like the lingering mist. The journey had already tested her courage, but something darker, something far more dangerous, was stirring just beyond her reach. The path ahead led them through dense, twisting woods, where the trees grew gnarled and twisted as though bent by time itself. The flask, now pulsing softly in Thalia's hand, guided them forward. Phelan walked silently by her side, his eyes sharp and alert, sensing the shift in the air as they ventured deeper into the unknown. "We're being watched," Phelan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Thalia's heart skipped a beat, and she gripped the flask tighter. "By whom?" Before Phelan could answer, the woods around them darkened. The trees, once thick with leaves, seemed to wither, and a chill swept through the air, biting at their skin. Shadows gathered, creeping along the ground like living things, and from those shadows, a figure began to emerge. The dark sorcerer. He appeared as a tall, imposing figure, cloaked in darkness itself. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his eyes glowed a fierce, unnatural green, cutting through the gloom like twin flames. His presence made the very air seem heavy, as though the world recoiled from his touch. Thalia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard stories of the dark sorcerer, whispers of a powerful being who had once ruled over the realms of magic. before he had turned his back on the light. He was said to be the one who had sealed away the magic, fearing its power would destroy the world. And now, here he stood, blocking their path. You should not have come this far, the sorcerer's voice echoed, deep and cold as winter's breath. His gaze locked onto the flask in Thalia's hand, and for a moment, the glow from it dimmed, as if even the magic within feared his presence. The magic was never meant to be found. Turn back or suffer the consequences of your arrogance. Thalia swallowed hard, fear gripping her, but she stood her ground. We can't turn back. The magic must be restored, or the world will fall into darkness. The sorcerer's laugh was hollow and cruel. Foolish child, do you think you understand the cost of what you seek? The magic was hidden for a reason. It is not a gift, it is a curse. You play with forces you cannot comprehend. Phelan stepped forward, raising his staff defensively. We have no choice. The magic is fading from the realms, and if it is not restored, everything will wither and die. The sorcerer's eyes flicked toward Phelan, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. I have seen what magic can do, Guardian, he said, his voice a hiss of disdain. I sealed it away to protect these lands from its destruction. You are too blind to see the truth. Thalia's voice trembled as she spoke, but there was a fire in her words. If the magic is so dangerous, why are you here now? Why do you care if we succeed or fail? For a moment, the sorcerer was silent, his eyes narrowing as if weighing her words. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he stepped closer, his dark figure towering over them. Because you are awakening something far more dangerous than you realize, he said softly. And there was a strange, almost sorrowful edge to his voice. Magic is not the answer you seek. It will consume you. It always does. Thalia felt a cold dread creep into her bones, but she could not allow fear to stop her. She raised the flask, its light flickering in defiance. We will restore the magic, she said, her voice steadier now. And we will do it without causing the destruction you fear. The sorcerer's eyes gleamed with a strange light. Very well, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. But know this, each step you take brings you closer to the abyss. The magic you seek has a will of its own, and it will demand a price. One that you may not be willing to pay. Without another word, the sorcerer's form began to dissolve into the shadows, his presence lingering like a bitter chill in the air. Thalia and Phelan watched as the darkness around them faded, the twisted trees straightening once more, and the cold lifting like a departing storm. The path ahead was clear, but the weight of the sorcerer's warning hung heavy over them. Phelan turned to Thalia, his expression troubled. Do you believe him? He asked quietly. Thalia stared down at the flask, its soft glow reflecting in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted. But I do know we've come too far to turn back now. With the dark sorcerer's warning echoing in her mind, Thalia and Phelan continued their journey, the flask leading them ever onward. The journey grew more treacherous as Thalia and Phelan pressed on, the weight of the dark sorcerer's warning heavy on their hearts. The landscape around them shifted, the air growing thick and shimmering as though the very world was dissolving into a dream. Before them lay the next realm, the realm of forgotten dreams. As they stepped forward, a strange fog enveloped them, soft and silken like a veil. It was neither cold nor warm, but it carried a scent that reminded Thalia of her childhood, of lavender fields and the crackling hearth of her family home. For a moment, she felt a strange peace wash over her. But Phelan's stern voice broke through her reverie. "Be cautious," he warned, his eyes scanning the mist with suspicion. "This realm preys upon memory and desire. It will show you what you want most, but it is all illusion. Lose yourself here, and you may never return." Thalia nodded, gripping the flask tighter. Its glow flickered dimly, as though the magic within was being subdued by the dreamlike quality of the realm. The mist swirled around them, and as they ventured deeper, faint images began to appear in the haze. Shapes and figures half-formed, as if the fog was trying to shape itself into something real. Ahead, a familiar voice called her name, soft and soothing. Thalia's heart leapt. She knew that voice. It was her mother's, who had passed when Thalia was still young. Her footsteps faltered, and she turned toward the sound, her eyes wide with wonder. "Thalia!" The mist parted, revealing a figure standing among the haze. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked just as Thalia remembered, with her long dark hair and the same warm presence that had once brought Thalia comfort during stormy nights. Tears sprang to Thalia's eyes as she stepped forward, the yearning for her mother's embrace overwhelming. "Mother," Thalia whispered, her voice trembling. But Phelan's hand shot out, grasping her arm. "No," he said firmly. "It's not real." Thalia hesitated, her heart torn between belief and doubt. The figure looked so real, so alive, and her mother's voice was filled with love. Could it truly be an illusion? Could the realm of forgotten dreams be so cruel as to conjure her deepest desires, only to snatch them away? "Thalia, you must let go," Phelan urged, his grip tightening. The fog swirled again, and her mother's face flickered, dissolving back into mist for the briefest moment before reforming. It was enough to break the spell. Thalia swallowed hard, tears still clinging to her lashes, and took a step back. Her mother's form shimmered, her kind eyes now hollow and sad, as if even the illusion mourned being cast aside. With a final sorrowful glance, the figure disappeared into the mist, leaving Thalia with a hollow ache in her chest. "This place will test you in ways no battle can," Phelan said quietly. It knows your heart, your deepest longings, and it will try to bind you to them. Thalia nodded, brushing the tears from her cheeks. I know, she whispered, but we must keep moving. They pressed on, the mist swirling in strange, hypnotic patterns. Soon, the haze began to change once more, revealing images of Phelan's past. A tall, proud figure in warrior's armor stood before him, a stern expression etched onto his face. Thalia saw Phelan stiffen beside her, his hand tightening around his staff. It was clear this vision too cut deeply. But they had no time for ghosts, real or imagined. Finally, after what felt like hours of wandering through the shifting fog, the mist began to thin. In the distance, the vague outline of a stone structure emerged, shimmering faintly with the glow of magic. Thalia's pulse quickened as they approached, the air thick with the energy of the lost magic they sought. The flask in her hand grew warm, the glow intensifying as they neared the stone altar at the heart of the realm. Resting upon it was the third fragment, a shimmering piece of magic that pulsed like a living thing. But the altar was guarded by more than mist and memories. Around it stood the forms of those who had succumbed to the realm, their figures faded and hollow, trapped forever in their dreams. Thalia hesitated, her heart aching for those lost souls, but she knew there was no way to save them. They had been consumed by the realm's illusions, their bodies little more than shadows of what they once were. We must be quick, Phelan said, his voice low. Thalia nodded, stepping forward with the flask in hand. The shadowy figures stirred, but they did not attack. Instead, they watched, their eyes filled with longing, as if they could sense the magic that still pulsed within the flask. Magic that had once belonged to their world. With trembling fingers, Thalia placed the flask on the altar. The third fragment lifted into the air, glowing brightly, and slowly it merged with the light of the flask. For a moment, the entire realm shimmered, as if the lost magic had brought a fleeting clarity to the dreamscape. But just as quickly, the mist returned, swirling once again in its endless dance. Thalia and Phelan stood in silence as the light from the flask dimmed, the third fragment now secured. But the realm of forgotten dreams left its mark on them, its illusions lingering like a distant memory that would never truly fade. They had survived this challenge, but the path ahead grew darker with each step. The air grew colder as Thalia and Phelan ventured farther from the realm of forgotten dreams. The mist from that strange place still clung to their clothes, as though the dream world was reluctant to release them entirely. With 3 fragments of magic now sealed within the flask, the weight of their task pressed down more heavily than ever. Before them, the landscape shifted once more, and the ground sloped downward. Far below, they could see a glittering river winding its way through a narrow gorge. But this was no ordinary river. The water shimmered with a pale, otherworldly light, and as the wind carried the river's sound to their ears, it seemed less like water and more like the soft murmur of voices, some laughing, some crying, some filled with regret. "This is the river of lost time," Phelan said, his voice hushed. "It carries with it the forgotten moments of the world, memories, hopes, and even lives that have slipped through the cracks of time. There is much to be gained here, but more to be lost." Thalia stared down at the river, feeling an odd pull toward it. The way the light danced upon the water reminded her of long-forgotten dreams, fleeting moments that had vanished into the past. She could feel the flask in her hand growing warmer, its light responding to the river's strange magic. "The next fragment lies within the river," Phelan continued. "But we must be careful. Time is treacherous here. It will show us things that are no longer or never were, and it will try to lure us into its currents." "How do we find the fragment?" Thalia asked, her eyes tracing the winding path of the river. She could hear the faint echo of a song, sweet and sorrowful, carried on the wind. "The flask will guide us," Phelan said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "But we must be swift. The longer we stay, the harder it will be to leave." They descended the rocky path toward the riverbank, the sound of the river growing louder with each step. Thalia could hear fragments of voices rising from the water, snatches of conversations, half-finished thoughts, and the distant echo of laughter. It was haunting and beautiful, and it filled her with a deep, inexplicable longing. When they reached the edge of the river, Thalia hesitated. The water was clear, but beneath the surface, she could see images flickering like shadows. Memories from long ago, playing out in the depths like reflections on glass. She knelt by the river, and as she did, a face appeared in the water. Her own, but younger. A child running through the fields near her village, her laughter ringing through the air. Thalia's breath caught in her throat. She had forgotten that moment. The joy of it. The innocence of a world untouched by the weight of her current quest. The river was showing her what had been lost to time. The fragments of her life that had slipped away, unnoticed and unmissed, until now. Phelan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do not linger on the past," he warned. "The river will draw you in if you let it." Thalia nodded, tearing her gaze away from the water. She held up the flask, watching as its light grew brighter, responding to the magic of the river. Slowly, the light began to pulse, pointing upstream toward a bend in the river where the currents grew faster, churning like a storm trapped within the water. "That's where we'll find the fragment," Phelan said, his eyes narrowing. Thalia and Phelan followed the flask's light along the riverbank until they reached the turbulent bend. The water here was wild, rushing over jagged rocks, and the voices from the river grew louder, almost frantic, as if time itself was crying out in confusion. The flask trembled in Thalia's hands, its glow intensifying as they neared the source of the disturbance. There, caught in the swirling current, was the fourth fragment of lost magic. It shone like a beacon beneath the water's surface, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to echo the beat of her own heart. But the river's magic was strong, and the current was fierce. "We'll need to draw it out," Phelan said. "But be careful. The river will try to pull you in." Thalia knelt by the riverbank once more, her fingers brushing the surface of the water. The cold stung her skin, and the voices grew louder, more insistent, as if they sensed her intent. She held the flask over the water, and slowly the light began to weave through the air like a thread, connecting with the fragment beneath the surface. But as the fragment rose from the depths, the river's magic surged. Thalia felt the pull of the current, not just on her body, but on her mind, as memories of her past flooded her thoughts. Moments of joy, of sorrow, of regret, all the things she wished she could change. She could hear the river whispering to her, offering her the chance to reclaim those lost moments, to rewrite her story. But Phelan's voice broke through the haze. "Stay strong, Thalia. The past is gone. You cannot live there." With the final effort, Thalia pulled the fragment from the river's grasp, and the water's pull weakened. The flask absorbed the fragment's magic, its light glowing brighter than ever before. The voices from the river quieted, and the current slowed, as if the river had accepted its loss. Thalia stood, her heart still heavy with the weight of the past, but her resolve stronger. "4 fragments now," she said softly, "and we are closer than ever." But as they turned to leave, the river whispered one last warning, so soft it was barely more than a breath. Time always takes its toll. The river of lost time faded into the distance as Thalia and Phelan pressed on, the flask now glowing with the magic of 4 fragments. The air grew heavier with each step, the weight of their quest sinking deep into Thalia's bones. She could feel it now. The final piece of lost magic was near, and with it, a growing sense of foreboding. Ahead, the land sloped upward, leading to a towering structure that loomed against the darkening sky. It was the Sorcerer's Keep, its black stone walls rising high like the teeth of some ancient beast. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air buzzed with dark magic. This was the place where their journey would end, one way or another. Thalia's heart pounded as they approached the gates of the keep. She could feel the magic inside the flask stirring, as though it too sensed the danger ahead. Phelan walked beside her, his staff gripped tightly in his hand, his eyes sharp and determined. But beneath his calm exterior, Thalia could see the tension in his face, the weight of what they were about to face. As they stepped through the gates, The temperature dropped, and a cold wind whipped through the air, biting at their skin. The courtyard was empty, eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of the wind against the ancient stone. The flask pulsed in Thalia's hand, guiding her toward the heart of the keep, where the final fragment waited. They entered the keep's grand hall, its vast chamber lit only by the faint glow of magical fire. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne of twisted black stone, was the dark sorcerer. His eyes, glowing with that familiar, unnatural green light, locked onto them the moment they stepped inside. "So, you have come at last," the sorcerer said, his voice echoing through the hall like the toll of a great bell. "I warned you, but you did not heed my words. Now, you stand at the edge of the abyss." Thalia's heart raced, but she stood her ground, the flask held firmly in her hand. "We've come to restore the lost magic," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "You cannot stop us." The sorcerer's laugh was low and mocking. "You still do not understand, child. The magic you seek to restore is not a gift. It is a curse. It will consume you, just as it consumed me. I sealed it away for a reason, to protect the world from its endless hunger." Phelan stepped forward, his staff raised in defiance. "You turned your back on the light," he said coldly. "You chose fear over balance. The magic must return, or all realms will fall into ruin." The sorcerer's eyes flickered with anger, and the air around him crackled with dark energy. "You know nothing of what you speak, Guardian. I did what was necessary, and now you will pay the price for your arrogance." With a wave of his hand, the dark sorcerer unleashed a torrent of magic, dark tendrils spiraling through the air like serpents, seeking to ensnare them. Phelan raised his staff, casting a shield of shimmering light around them, but the sorcerer's power was immense. The force of the attack sent tremors through the hall, and Thalia struggled to keep her footing. "Thalia, now!" Phelan shouted, his voice strained as he held the shield. Thalia's heart pounded as she lifted the flask. It glowed brightly, its light growing in intensity as the fragments of magic within began to merge. The sorcerer's eyes narrowed as he saw the flask's power gathering, and with a snarl, he launched another attack, this one aimed directly at Thalia. The dark magic struck her like a wave, knocking her to the ground. Pain shot through her body, and for a moment, the world blurred around her. But as she lay there, gasping for breath, the flask pulsed in her hand, its warmth spreading through her, filling her with a strange sense of calm. She could hear the sorcerer's voice, distant but clear. "You cannot win, girl. The magic will destroy you." But Thalia knew deep in her heart that the magic wasn't evil. It wasn't the darkness that had corrupted the sorcerer. It was his own fear. The magic needed to be balanced, not feared. With renewed strength, Thalia rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with determination. She held the flask high, and its light exploded outward, filling the hall with a brilliant glow. The tendrils of dark magic recoiled, retreating from the pure light of the flask. The dark sorcerer's face twisted in rage and fear as the magic of the flask began to draw him in. "No!" he roared, his voice trembling with desperation. "You do not know what you are doing." But it was too late. The light from the flask surged, enveloping the sorcerer. And for a moment, the entire keep trembled as though the very fabric of the world was being rewritten. Then, just as suddenly, the light faded and the hall fell silent. The dark sorcerer was gone. His dark magic dissolved into the air like mist. The flask in Thalia's hand glowed with the soft, steady light of the restored magic. She felt its power humming through her, but it was no longer wild or untamed. It was balanced, calm, and whole. Phelan stepped beside her, his eyes filled with awe. "You did it," he whispered. Thalia nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had won the battle, but the cost had been great. The magic was restored, but it came with a new responsibility, a responsibility she now carried. Together they left the keep, the weight of their journey still fresh in their minds. But as they stepped into the light of the world beyond, Thalia knew that the future held hope, and the magic would once again flourish under her care.